how can they get help and also find a balance?
Find balance. Yeah. I mean, the thing with bipolar disorder, as with schizophrenia, as with major depressive disorder, like these are severe mental illnesses. Going untreated or without supervision could have very detrimental impact on your life.
There are many illnesses that I've encountered that actors or creatives have had. One being bipolar. So can you describe what bipolar disorder is?
Yeah. So I mean, bipolar disorder is a mental illness or mental disorder that is characterized by having extreme mood swings. So either very high manic episodes or very low depressive episodes. And with bipolar disorder, also called manic depression sometimes, these episodes can last as short as a day, as long as a few weeks, but the problem is it doesn't allow for consistency, and it doesn't allow for the person to find a place of balance. I think all artists on some level have access to higher highs, and maybe lower lows, and maybe just the normal baseline, and that's okay. I don't think we're trying to turn off feelings. We're definitely not. But bipolar disorder can be characterized in a way where it interrupts your life completely, where you can't maintain jobs or relationships, and it's severe, destruction within your own sense of self and life.
Having bipolar disorder, how can you bring yourself back to center in that, with that disorder? Because it doesn't mean you're broken forever, and you know what I mean? Because sometimes, especially within families of color, something like that becomes a stigma. And I think in acting as well, which is why a lot of actors don't share what they're going through, is because they don't want that stigma. They don't want people to look at them and go, "You're broken," or "You know what? You're the crazy one. We don't want you here."
So, I mean, how can people get help, or how can people?
Yeah, how can they get help and also find a balance?
Find balance. Yeah. I mean, the thing with bipolar disorder, as with schizophrenia, as with major depressive disorder, like these are severe mental illnesses. Going untreated or without supervision could have very detrimental impact on your life. I'm a huge fan of medication that is prescribed appropriately by a psychiatrist to help with those kinds of disorders. Bipolar disorder is very common, and there's a whole spectrum of extremes. It doesn't show up the same way in each person. In many ways, the human brain is so unique, and each person's combination of history and mental makeup and energy and all this kind of stuff creates a specific, unique scenario each time. So I certainly always encourage clients to have a psychiatrist if they have a diagnosis that is kind of, higher. And you don't have to use medication, but I know I've seen people find it's almost like you're swimming in the ocean, you're about to start a race, and the gun goes off and you start swimming and all the swimmers around you and then you realize, oh my God, I don't know how to swim. And you spend most of the race trying to keep your head above water. It's not that you're not trying hard enough. It's that something just didn't click. You didn't have the tools, or you just didn't learn how to swim. It's not your fault, right? And medication can kind of do that thing of all of a sudden, oh my gosh, I'm swimming again. And now I can compete in the race. I still have to work hard. It's not like this is going to give me the solution. It's not going to give me the win in the race. But now I can keep up. I'm competitive. I mean, we don't tell people who have, other diseases not to take medication for it, right? You would never say to someone, oh, don't take your insulin. Don't take your insulin, it means you're broken. There's not that stigma in a lot of physical illnesses. If someone breaks their leg, you don't say, oh, that's so weak. Like, why would you even put a cast on? I did it without a cast, you know? And I think the same thing goes for mental health. I mean, you don't have to, long-term chronic bipolar obviously needs to be managed under a doctor long-term. There also are smaller episodes where people go through a transition or have a traumatic incident and they have depression or they have severe anxiety or PTSD. I mean, that can be supported by a number of different techniques and different interventions. Sometimes medicine can go along with therapy. Sometimes therapy is enough. I definitely think each person has their areas of comfort, but I also think that we shouldn't go in ruling something out. We have to be going with an open mind and say, you know, I'm a human being trying to figure this thing called life out with everyone else around me. It's hard, and there are going to be periods of time where I need a little extra help, and that's okay. And isn't it better that I use help in connection with someone who has experience about it rather than going and drinking on my own, right? Isn't it better that I'm sharing my questions and I'm not holding it in silent, right? I think that's where it gets really scary, especially with substances, is when it's being used
to medicate, to
self-medicate.
You're using it to self-medicate. Yes.
Yeah, and yeah.
No, go ahead. I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, I mean, I don't think there's anything wrong necessarily with the idea of helping yourself, but I do think there's something fundamentally flawed in the idea that I don't need anyone else to get where I want to go.
Right.
There's a strength in being able to ask for help.
Yeah, and I love the way you put it. If you break your leg, you're gonna go and get help. It's just that we decide what it is. We can't let the outside world decide what it is for us. Right. You know, we got to take that power back to go.
Exactly.
This is, you know, I take medication for this, just like I would if I were anemic, if I had diabetes or whatever. I take medication to keep me in balance. And something I just learned from you is that manic depression is the same as bipolar. I thank you for clarifying it, that it is the same thing.
It's the same thing. And also, I mean, we use these terms very fluidly. Like, some people say, oh, I'm so bipolar, right? And that's not the same as a clinical diagnosis of bipolar disorder, right? If you have some extremes, like you have high highs and low lows, but it's not within the realm of, you know, you're having psychotic symptoms or you're feeling kind of like you want to harm yourself or harm others, you're not finding a pattern of pervasive destructiveness in your life, that's not bipolar disorder. What that is just kind of more extreme. And that may not have a definition, but you absolutely deserve help to support it. It may not be medication that's needed, right? So we have something called major depression or clinical depression. And that is, you know, that's kind of the typical depression that we know about, where people really struggle with motivation, with taking care of themselves, with getting out of bed, feeling flat, or feeling, you know, just persistently depressed. There are lesser extremes of that, where it's depression and you feel low, and maybe you need some support around that, but maybe it's not something that can be clinically depressed.
Okay, so let's talk about that, because I think depending on the degree of the depression, it could be that you just need a life coach. You just need somebody who can guide you. But then if it gets more serious, then maybe you need a therapist. Mm-hmm. But if it's very severe, then you need a psychiatrist who can prescribe you some medication.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah, I mean, yes. So yes, and. So the difference between a therapist and a life coach is a little bit confusing. A therapist is a clinical professional who has been licensed under the state board, who's undergone so many, usually like 3,000 hours of supervised clinical training, who's gone to a master's program, who has kind of this standardized clinical skill set that you can say, okay, this person is authorized by kind of, you know, governing bodies to be a mental health professional. A life coach is actually a kind of a more umbrella term for an unregulated field. So there are many different types of life coaches. Some life coaches are incredible at the work they do, and they actually do trauma-informed life coaching, right? So it is geared around kind of like working through trauma, finding ways to like focus your life, setting goals, achieving those goals. Then there are some people who just call themselves life coaches, and I don't know. So you have to be careful. I'm not saying therapists are better than life coaches, not at all. But I think you have to be careful to make sure that you don't just go to the first person who says, "Oh yeah, I'm a life coach. You should trust me."
Right. That's true.
Or even I'm a therapist. You should trust me.
That's true.
It's really important that when you find someone, you're looking for someone to connect with. You're building a relationship with someone, and so that means you have to. Sometimes I think interview them. You know, call up a couple therapists, call up a couple life coaches. Try a couple sessions and see how it goes. You can always break up with your therapist.
Yeah, and I think it's really important you saying that. I always like to say to somebody, I don't know if I'm going to like you, so I just want to try this for a month.
Yeah.
I want
4 sessions.
Yeah, I just want to try this for a month and see how we work. Because I don't know if I'm going to like you, and I don't want to make a full commitment, and then it's not working. I need to feel like this is going to be a good partnership. And I think sometimes with artists, we are so afraid that people won't like us if we just state our terms. To say, you know what, let's take this. You know, it's like you're not just going to go to the dealer and buy a car. You want to take it out for a drive. You want to try it. You know, you go, I'm not sure about this, and maybe you go, I don't know if I want to buy this, and then you go to the car rental place and say, hey, do you have this car? And then you take that car out for like 2-3 days and get a feel for it, because sometimes just going into the showroom for a little test drive is not enough.
Yeah.
And so it is, I think it's very valid to do a, 4 times. That gives you enough. I think it too. But but 4, you are able to cement, yes, I'm getting value here. This is where I need to be. You may not like what they have to say, but it resonates. Because sometimes we need to know that you're not always going to get what you want to hear, but it's necessary to get what you need to hear.
Yes. I think there's also something to be said about realizing that there isn't like the perfect therapist out there. In many ways, therapists and life coaches are also just people. So we're looking for the good enough therapist, the same way that we're looking for a good enough parent, We're not looking for perfection, but we are looking for someone who's willing to show up, be with us in the room, listen, hold space, ask the questions that kind of push us into a place of self-reflection. And also, the other thing that's really interesting is there's just as much value in learning how to break up with your therapist. We call it termination. There's just as much value in terminating as there is in starting a relationship. We don't have a lot of opportunities in this society to have a good goodbye. People die. People disappear. People ghost us on social media or on like dating apps, We have a lot of ruptures that happen. And so the opportunity with a therapist is actually, I'm paying for you to hold space for me and to actually be a mirror to reflect something back about myself. And that might mean I'm learning how to not feel guilty when I say, I don't actually want to work with you anymore.
I would love for you to unpack what it means to hold space.
The way I envision it is, in order to fall apart, we need a container. And when you're entering a therapy room or a room with a coach or someone who's helping guide you, we need to let ourselves fall apart. And so what the holding space is almost, it's multiple things. It's a contract, an ethical contract saying, you know, what you share here is confidential. This is going to be a space that is dedicated to you, where the therapist will make sure that she goes to supervision and works out her own stuff in her own time and is really present with you. It also means that the possibility that the client teaches the therapist something that changes the therapist's mind is also there. It's a bi-directional space where we're in relationship and the therapist doesn't know everything and the client is broken. The idea is that I'm going to create space where I'm going to do everything I can to be present and to show up. And the contract is that you're also going to do that. And if it means you fall apart, it's a safe enough space to do that.
When do you know you need therapy?
If you start knowing that you need therapy, it's probably a little late for it. No, it's not too late. I mean, I would say, like, when you know you need therapy, once you notice that you need therapy, you're into a place where there's some pretty significant symptoms that are coming up. So there isn't the right time to get therapy. Obviously, when you're in acute crisis, going to therapy in that place is a great time. It's also great to go to therapy to learn tools before you go into crisis, right? So if you notice, I mean, the acute crisis symptoms that we start looking for are not sleeping, having difficulty eating, having severe body image issues, severe exercise, feeling a loss of interest in things, feeling unmotivated, feeling out of control. All these things would be symptoms that, like, yes, definitely go to a therapist and get support for that. Also, instances of life transitions, life changing, a loss or a death of a loved one, a significant kind of world event like a global pandemic, losing a job or starting a new job, ending a relationship or starting a new relationship. Like, anytime there's a transition in our lives, a lot of times stuff from the past will bubble back up. And it's a great time to actually have that opportunity to get curious about where I have hurt and where I'm still holding. I also think there isn't a time, like, you don't have to have a reason to go to therapy. You can if you want, but you also can just say, I just want to learn more about myself. Like, I want to talk to someone about my life story. I want to have someone ask me questions that make me think, and I want to be building more about my understanding of who I am and who I want to be and what my patterns are that get in my way. So, with couples therapy, I often say, going when things are okay is a really great place to start, because it means that you're in this maintenance mode. Like, you don't wait till a car breaks down on the highway to get fixed. You take your car in for regular checkups. We do that with doctors for our body. I mean, that's kind of what therapy can be. Some people use therapy, couples therapy, to break up with each other, and that's okay. A lot of people use it to strengthen their communication skills or to learn how to be in better relationships. So that's a long answer for sure.
No, because it's not it is a very intense question.
Yeah.
I personally think that most artists should have a therapist, or at least have a life coach, a certified life coach, that they need accountability. Be it therapy, be it a life coach, somebody who they're paying to tell them the truth, not just a friend or a family member who muddy the waters, but to find
someone who has no skin in the game.
That's right.
Someone who is in on some level. I mean, objectivity is impossible, but who has a subjective relationship to helping you reach your goals. It's hard. Friends can't do it. It's a place where you can truly go into a selfish kind of mentality and really get what you need. And sometimes that's unconditional love or unconditional positive regard. And sometimes it's someone saying, I think you need to actually stop messing around and actually take yourself more seriously. Like, Why do you think you don't deserve to be happy? Why do you think you don't deserve success? Let's go there.
I am in total agreement with you. I also, I have my own little thing where I say, if you keep repeating the same thing over and over again, you need therapy.
Yeah.
You're not crazy, but you have not resolved that issue.
Mm-hmm.
And, to keep telling it to people who really don't care about you, it is not going to help you.
Yes.
You need to go somewhere where you can just address it, work on it, and live your best life.
Well, I also like to say to people, it's not that you need to go to therapy, it's that you have a right to go to therapy. You have the right to have a space where you're not being judged. You have the right to have a space where you can explore and try to become your best self, as opposed to you should because there's something wrong with you, which I know you weren't saying, but sometimes we hear this idea that I'm broken, I need to go to therapy, and everyone's like, no, I'm not going to go to therapy. And the reality is the most well-adjusted and the most successful people I know have done time in therapy and have spent time in therapy so that they got to get to know themselves better.
Yeah, I just think therapy is a tool for artists that can be very beneficial if you partner with the right person. That it can be very satisfying, very fulfilling, and just deepen your relationships with other people. But if you're having issues and you're not addressing them, and then you're putting them on friends or family or other people to solve it, it negates who you are. It lessens you on some level because you're going back to a dry well. You're going back to somewhere where there's no water to say, I'm thirsty. No, we can't. And sometimes it is, it's hard to ask that of somebody who does not have the tools to help you. I think that's my that's my understanding. That's how I see it. I wanted to ask you about microaggression. That's a term that I keep hearing a lot lately.
Yeah. I mean, microaggression, when I hear that word, I think about something that diminishes some part of our identity categories. It could be race, it could be sexuality, it could be gender, it could be because it's this commonplace, daily, kind of verbal or kind of implicit indignity, right? So it's sometimes so small that it's hard to identify as a problem, but it happens so frequently that it chips away. It's almost like death by 1,000 paper cuts, right? It chips away at your sense of self and your sense of well-being. Microaggression often comes along with gaslighting, which is this idea that what you're feeling is actually you're crazy to feel that way, and so people could say, well, what are you talking about? I was just joking. And that's okay. But if you're a white man joking to a woman of color and making fun of her on some level, there's already a balance that's not equal in our society. Pay scale, respect, everything. And so we can't say that a joke is without having, when one person holds a certain amount of societal power, not because they deserve it, because society gives it to them, that can be a form of harm against someone who doesn't hold that same, respect within the society system that we have, which is obviously very broken systems.
We're trying to make it better.
I mean, one of the things that I think with therapy is sometimes it's really helpful to have someone else tell you, no, what you're feeling and noticing is real. Especially when it's a microaggression. It's hard for us to know, is it me? Am I being too sensitive? Often women will do that, minimize their own kind of experience because brush it off because they want to be cool or they want, it's not a big deal. And sometimes it's really important to have a therapy space to say, well, let's ask about that. How do you feel when that happens? Does it, what comes up for you? Does it connect you to a time where you felt powerful, or does it connect you to a time where you felt weak? Do you feel safe?
Yes, and that's excellent. When an actor is emotionally unavailable, what exercises would you suggest that actor use in order to reconnect with his or her emotions?
So I think emotions are really cool because there's no fear of running out of them. Like in our normal human state, emotions are free flowing and we have access to them. When trauma comes in, trauma often blocks us from being able to either express our emotions freely or to feel our emotions. So, one of the things I work on a lot with clients is kind of identifying ways that certain patterns in our life have been coping mechanisms to deal with trauma. And those coping mechanisms often are maladaptive in terms of they don't help us get to be our best self, but they really work when you're experiencing trauma. And so how do we feel safe enough to try a different coping mechanism? And how do we feel safe enough to heal from feeling like we have to defend ourselves all the time? When we're in a state of hyper-arousal, when our kind of defense mechanisms are up, we're not in a place of authentic connection to our emotions. There's tapping into that well where the emotions come and go, and we don't have to worry about it. When we're feeling worried about being judged, when we're judging ourselves, when we're anxious that we're not getting approval from people, when we are worried that we're going to get yelled at or fired, when we, all these things, it stops that connection to almost like that bubbling well of emotions. And so the first step is noticing it. I always talk to my clients about the first step before you do anything about change is just learning to notice what's happening. Because once we can notice it, then we can have feelings about it. And so often those feelings are uncomfortable. Judgment, guilt, shame, all this kind of stuff. And through the process of therapy, we can bring acceptance to that, and that opens the door to being able to change. So if somebody is stuck, they're unavailable to connect with your emotions, what I would do is often start by playing theater games, making it less about being perfect and getting it right, and more about trying to tap into that place, like we talked about earlier, of authentic play and give and receive. And a lot of that is scary when you've been in a situation where you've been criticized or abused or experienced extreme hardship. It's hard to let go of that self-protective mechanism.
Another term I hear a lot is triggers. What are triggers?
Triggers is another word like bipolar that I think is used incorrectly sometimes. It's not bad, but it's, we often say, oh, I'm so triggered. In a clinical sense, triggers are something that sets off a memory tape or a flashback, and it transports you to an event or a time where you were unsafe or experiencing trauma. So it could be a vision of something you see.
Donald Trump triggers me. Donald Trump triggers my trauma. Okay.
Yes,
all right.
I agree. Right?
Right?
I agree. He does. And, a trigger can also be something that we use it more vernacular. We use it kind of in passing, saying like, oh, I'm so triggered by that person, meaning I'm annoyed. But an actual trigger is